What's happening? I was thinking something I don't think I've ever covered in depth yet is the greatest lie ever told. And that is when any woman says the phrase, "I am single by choice." I'ma just tell you right now, they're lying. If you line up 100 women right now that all say single by choice, 95 of them are lying. And that's being generous because it's probably closer to 98 or 99. Here's the backstory that most people don't know. The phrase involuntarily celibate, which they now say incel, that they apply to men, was originally what women said when they were in a dry spell. I know this because I was in chat rooms and I was in live chats and I was on live streams and I heard these women say it. They were women roughly around my age, slightly older. So I'm 43. This was something that the women now, they would be 45, maybe even pushing 50. They would say this. Back then, when they would have been in their early to mid 30s, I would say, because that was around when I was roughly 28 or so. So, a little over 10 years ago, or about a little under, a little over, yeah. So, they'd have been in their 30s. They would say that when they were in a dry spell, and they weren't really getting a lot of attention, they weren't really getting a lot of guys coming around, and they couldn't really bag, a catch. And then, slowly, they started to push that claim onto men, saying that men were incels, or involuntarily celibate, and that's why they had the views they had, and that's why they were critical of women's behavior. That's where the red pill sphere and manosphere stuff came from. They would all push it off onto that, meanwhile saying that they were single by choice. They're not. They will say this as what I believe the newer generation calls coping, because they don't want to acknowledge the fact that men don't want them. Back then they could. So again, give it like 15 years ago, they could accept that men just weren't accepting them. Men weren't picking them. Men weren't choosing them. And they would say, "I'm involuntarily celibate." Follow with, "I would love to find a guy or at least somebody to lay down with for a night," or whatever. But they were fishing, men weren't biting. And now it's turned into a shaming tactic to say that, oh, it's the men who can't get women, it's the men who are incels, and they are single by choice. That's not true. Two reasons. One, men are more likely to be abstinent comfortably. Men generally don't want to, don't choose to, but men can do it, and there's multiple reasons why. When men get in a grinding mode where they want to work and they want to achieve, they will ignore that anyway because they'll see it as a distraction. Two, if you ask any man that works out heavily, like in the gym every day, that drains your testosterone sometimes, and it'll just take away your sex drive. I know people have gone through this, and I know people who have taken, if you ever hear somebody say T supplements, they're saying testosterone supplements because sometimes you can work out so much that you can drain your testosterone. It can lower your sex drive. It's a common, semi-common thing. So it's far more common. Also, what most people don't know is that men's sex drive peak happens way earlier, like early to mid 20s. Women's sex drive peak happens way later. If I remember correctly, it's somewhere around like mid 30s to early 40s. So when you see all these plus 30s talking about they're single by choice, they're not. They're in the peak of their sex drive. That's why cougars exist. That's because cougars will be in their peak sex drive, and they will go after men in their peak sex drive at what age? Mid to late 20s, early to mid to late 20s. So when you see that 40-year-old chick doting around that 20-something-year-old dude, that's the explanation. So when you hear this, it's a lie. They're not choosing it. And the way you know they're not choosing it is because the second a guy comes along and shows them interest, they start following this dude around and making plans for their future. That's why they get so mad when they see guys, what's the phrase they, passport bros and all this stuff. That's why. If they were single by choice and they wanted to stay single, why would they care if a guy goes and get a passport and go gets a woman out of the country? What difference would it make? That's like a vegan saying that they got a problem with a guy going to a steakhouse. You don't care because you don't want what they have. You don't want what they offer. But they do want men. They do want relationships. So when the men don't come to them, they get mad. And the only way they can cope with it is to say, no, I'm choosing to be this way. It's not them not choosing me. It's me choosing to not have them, which is a lie. That's why you hear these same people always in dating podcasts, always having dating podcasts, always talking about dating. When was the last time you saw somebody make the term involuntary celibate in a space that wasn't talking about dudes? I don't need to say nothing else.